You are listening to the Star Lords Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
One of the galaxy's most powerful Jedi in history. Yoda has personally witnessed and partook in many of the most pivotal moments in time. A petite, green-skinned alien whose species remains as of yet unclassified, Yoda stood only 2 foot 1 inches tall, lived to 900 standard years. Despite his stature, Yoda was widely recognized as one of the most powerful and wise Force users to have ever lived. Much of Yoda's early life is shrouded in mystery. His homeworld is unknown, as is even the official classification of his species. The lack of concrete information about the Jedi Master's past has led to a legendary veneer that may or may not be accurate in its accounts of his early years. It is said that Yoda was not initially aware of his Force abilities, and only discovered them after meeting with and traveling to the galactic core worlds with a human on a barely space-worthy ship, simply looking for work. But the ship was struck by an asteroid, stranding the 2 travelers on a swamp world before being discovered by a serpentine Hyzalarian Jedi Master named Nkata del Gormo, who revealed to both travelers that they were in fact Force sensitive. He brought them back to his hovel and offered to train the pair, who accepted. A Republic ship picked them up, and the stranded Yoda and compatriot were brought back to the Jedi Temple to continue their training.
Fey Coven. Yoda's formal training at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant began, and he was instructed under Fey Coven, Grand Master of the Order, and renowned Jedi in her own right. Fey was a veteran of the new Sith Wars, and had been chosen to lead the Jedi into a golden age. Yoda grew more powerful in the ways of the Force, and became a skilled Jedi Padawan after passing of the Gathering, a ritual before becoming a Padawan, though little is known of this time. Yoda would go on to become a Jedi Knight and achieve the rank of Master at 96 years old. He would soon after be chosen to join the Jedi High Council. Because of the long lives exhibited by Yoda's species, he was able to train many Padawans during his years as a Jedi. Chuanthor.
500 years before the Battle of Yavin, a massive mobile Jedi Academy was commissioned to be built in the form of a spaceship called the Chuanthor. 100 years later, the ship was finished and served the Jedi for many years and under the command of many Jedi Masters. Its massive scale allowed it to house up to 10,000 Jedi at a given time, not including its crew, staff, and other researchers. Tragically, however, the ship would meet its end when it crashed on the dark and stormy world of Dathomir, only about 200 years after it set sail amongst the stars. Master Yoda and a Jedi strike team were sent on a rescue mission to recover the survivors. However, they found themselves blocked by the witches that called Dathomir home. After Yoda saved the life of one young witch, named Rel, the Jedi reached an agreement with the witches to allow the safe extraction of the survivors. However, in exchange, the witches would claim ownership over the wreckage and the Jedi library within. Yoda made a private agreement with a young Rel that she would hide and preserve some of the text for a Jedi who would come and liberate their world from the influence of the Night Sisters. Yoda's prophecy would come true, as over 400 years later, Luke Skywalker would find himself on Dathomir and be entrusted with the very same texts by a now venerable and ancient Mother Rel.
Impossible to see. The future is.
As a senior member of the Jedi Council, Yoda's exploits had become legendary, and he was recognized as one of the greatest Jedi to ever live. He was a master swordsman, the best in the Order, and his mastery of the Force was second to none. He was considered one of the wisest Jedi, and invested heavily in the training of future generations, taking time to instruct clans of younglings. For Yoda was, for all his great talents, a teacher first and foremost. Yoda ascended to Grand Master of the Jedi Order. As Grand Master, Yoda was involved in the most important decision-making of the Jedi High Council, and plotting the course of the future for the Jedi. From the Inkori uprising to the initial decision not to train Anakin Skywalker and its reversal, the emergence of the Sith, to an active role in the commencement of the Clone Wars, Yoda's wisdom and Force aptitude would be tested. Though Yoda's abilities to discern the future had become increasingly clouded, he knew some unseen darkness was growing. Though he lacked the clarity of vision to see through the machinations of the Sith, now embedded deep in the heart of the Republic as its Chancellor.
To admit that without the clones it would not have been a victory.
Victory? Victory, you say? Master Obi-Wan, not victory. The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun. The Clone War has.
The Separatist Crisis was a major galactic event that saw numerous planets and their supporters attempt to secede from the Galactic Republic. By this time, the Jedi Order had been too deeply ingratiated with politics and was forced into the uncomfortable position of moving from peacekeepers to warfighters for the Republic. Despite his growing inability to predict the future, Yoda had the foresight to go to the planet Kamino and lead the first assault of the Grand Army of the Republic in a rescue mission and in the opening battle of the Clone Wars on Geonosis. As Grand Master of the Jedi Order, Yoda was instantly bestowed the rank of High Jedi General and personally led troops into combat across numerous battlefields. During the war, Yoda assumed the role of Master of the Order for Mace Windu, an elected and distinct role from Grand Master, which Yoda already held. Master Windu stepped down from the role to assume a more active frontline position during the Clone Wars, though Yoda himself would also be found at the forefront of battle on numerous occasions. Yoda had also encountered the disembodied voice of the long-dead Jedi Master Qui-Gon, who began teaching Yoda how to achieve immortality in the Force and how to commune between the living and the dead. Yoda would later teach Obi-Wan these techniques after both survivors of the war went into exile during the reign of the Empire. Clouded by the dark side, Yoda, despite his exceptional talents and mastery of the Force, failed to prevent the end of the Jedi Order at the hands of the Darth Sidious and the fallen Jedi Darth Vader. During Order 66, the command to wipe out the Jedi, Yoda narrowly escaped the attempt on his life on the planet Kashyyyk, where he was again commanding a military operation in the field. With the aid of his Wookiee allies, including none other than a young Chewbacca, Yoda escaped the world, regrouped with Obi-Wan, and launched a final counterattack against the newly emerged Sith. Going back to Coruscant and warning off other Jedi who were being lured back to the planet to be executed, Yoda personally undertook the mission to kill the newly appointed Emperor of the Galactic Empire, Darth Sidious. In a harrowing duel against the Sith Lord, Yoda was ultimately forced into a stalemate and retreat. Having failed to kill the Sith, Yoda departed the known galaxy and went into a self-imposed exile on the backwater swamp planet of Dagobah.
Life in exile. Yoda lived a simple and unglamorous life on the world that was teeming with Force energy and allowed him to contemplate the mysteries of the Force and the broader events across the galaxy. Having seen the destruction wrought and the triumph of evil, Yoda had lost his faith in the ability of those lost to the dark side to be redeemable. He had said as much to his newest student, a young Luke Skywalker, believing Darth Vader beyond redemption, despite Luke's fervent belief that the Sith warrior could be redeemed.
I'm looking for a great warrior.
Great warrior! The Force not to make one great!
Through his many years as a Jedi Master, Yoda had numerous students, both as a teacher to clans of younglings and as a one-on-one mentor through the practice of apprenticeship. Though not all were known by name, there are at least 3 notable and 1 infamous. The first known student of Jedi Master Yoda was a diminutive Kushaban male named Ikrit, over 300 years before the Battle of Yavin. Kushaban are small legomorphs with long floppy ears and might be described as cute by sapiens. They are known for their mood fur, which change colors based on how they feel, but have a white coloration when at peace. Ikrit was skilled but struggled as a Jedi, almost killing a compatriot and Master Yoda with a lightsaber during an altercation, causing him to swear off the use of the weapon. Ikrit ascended to the rank of Jedi Master himself, despite his struggles, and even discovered the origins of the Massassi temples on Yavin 4. In an attempt to save the souls of trapped Massassi children, Ikrit entered a centuries-long trance on Yavin, being isolated from the tumultuous events that engulfed the galaxy and the destruction of the Jedi Order. He was discovered and awoken by young Anakin Solo and Tahir Viola as students of Luke's Jedi Praxium, where he could pass on his great knowledge. Ikrit would later die during the events of the Yazan-Mong War, but his legacy and the legacy of his master Yoda would live on in his students and teachings that were passed on.
One of the Jedi Order's finest swordsmen, Sin Dralig, served as its battle master and head of security of the Jedi Temple amidst the tempestuous Clone Wars. He taught lightsaber combat and the various forms therein to fledgling and seasoned Jedi alike. Dralig learned of the art of lightsaber combat from Yoda himself, and the tradition of master swordsmanship would be passed down from generation to generation. His teachings were recorded on the Great Jedi Holocron, where they still can be accessed to pass on this knowledge. As head of security, Dralig would direct the Jedi Temple Guard and security forces and face down the newly appointed Sith, Darth Vader, during the destruction of the Jedi Temple at the fall of the Republic. Sindralig died defending younglings, and the temple as a whole from the rapacious Sith and the clone troopers that came to execute the Jedi.
Perhaps one of Master Yoda's most promising students, Count Dooku was a talented Force user and exceptional swordsman. Yoda had a personal connection to the young Padawan, and often served as his personal confidant as a fledgling Jedi, though he was apprenticed to another Jedi Master. As Jedi Knight Dooku convinced Yoda to take on a young Qui-Gon Jinn as his own apprentice. Despite the great potential in the young Jedi Dooku, he had entered in unorthodox Jedi beliefs and had become increasingly critical of the Republic. After the Battle of Galadran, Dooku left the Jedi Order to the dismay of Master Yoda and joined the Lost 20, Jedi that had left the Order. Yoda would become more devastated to learn that his former student had not only left the Order, but had been seduced by the dark side and become Darth Tyrannus at the outset of the Clone Wars. Yoda, though beginning to be weary with age and experience, had once held out hope that his former pupil could be redeemed, even falling for a ploy where the Count pretended to defect back to the Republic. It was perhaps Count Dooku that had solidified Yoda's belief that those corrupted by the dark side could not be redeemed, forever cauterizing Yoda's optimism for the future.
Amidst the destruction of the Jedi Order and his subsequent exile, Yoda had one more student to teach, one who would be his greatest acolyte. Luke Skywalker, at the behest of Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost, would find the powerful Jedi Master in exile and learn much from the wise hermit. Luke would be present when the weariness of a long life had finally overcome the ancient Jedi Master, and Yoda passed away, his material body disappearing as he became one with the Force. Learning the secret techniques of continuing one's consciousness after death, Yoda would go on to commune with the living, appearing to Luke as a Force ghost and lending his wisdom and counsel to the future Grand Master of a resurrected order. Though Yoda is often cited as a teacher to many Jedi, including Obi-Wan, it is notable that Yoda taught many students as younglings prior to their official apprenticeships, and so many could call Yoda their teacher, mentor, or instructor at various times during their lives as Jedi. Yoda was always keen to counsel, teach, and learn alongside even other Jedi Masters, and took the time to bestow wisdom on clone troopers that found themselves in his service.
Although far from the only known member, Yoda's species is rare on the galactic stage, though at least 2 other prominent Jedi are known to have also been a part of the High Council, and one even serving at the same time as Yoda. This disproportionate representation of Yoda's species amongst the highest echelons of the Jedi Order, despite the general rarity of the species on the galactic stage, suggests a very powerful connection between them and the Force. They are identifiable by their diminutive stature, standing less than 3 feet tall, and their long pointy ears, tridactyl hands, and anisodactyl feet. They were known to have green skin and green blood with sharp, jagged teeth, likely used for a carnivorous diet.
Olay Anti-Wrinkle Cream is clinically proven to make your skin look and feel younger. It protects from the harsh effects of a binary star system that can make you look much older in a short amount of time. Our tested formula will smooth wrinkles, rejuvenate, and help your skin glow. New from Yoda.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not.
Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
This is Jordan.
And we are currently landed on the swampy planet of Dagobah to reminisce about the long-dead Jedi Master Yoda.
Yeah, we wanted to come to the place where it actually happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we can really experience it, you know.
Yes.
It'll be part of our lived experience.
We can talk firsthand about Yoda's life.
Yes.
Yoda is a legendary figure, if not one of the most recognizable. Star Wars is full of signature characters that people instantly recognize, from Darth Vader to Stormtrooper helmets. But Yoda is definitely up there in terms of an icon for Star Wars. So
very iconic, yeah.
But surprisingly, despite his fame, and even the way he speaks is very notable, but despite his fame, there's not really a lot to him other than what appears in the movies, surprisingly. You would think a character like Yoda would have all this deep lore and backstory and kind of secrets and things like that, but there's really not much more than what you get on the label for such a prominent Star Wars character.
I wanted to say it in some ways, and I also looked a little bit into his history. It's it almost reminds me of Jesus, only to say in the Gospels and the Bible, everything that happens around Jesus, he's 30 years old, right?
Yeah.
But you get almost nothing in between the time he's born and his life and ministry and whatnot. So, and Yoda is much the same way. He has 900 years. You know a little bit about it, his origin, and then you have these centuries in between.
Yeah, that are completely dark. Which brings me to the first point I kind of want to talk about. Despite having such a long lifespan, 900 years, that's almost 1,000 years. That's so hard for people to grasp.
Yeah.
Just in terms of if you think about that kind of lifespan in our years, in human years, or not just human years, but in Earth, in real life from 2021, what would have happened in 900 years? And Canada and the USA, that's not far enough. Yeah. Age of Exploration, Napoleonic Wars, Black Powder, not far enough.
The Reformation,
not far enough.
Yeah.
The 1120s is where you'd be 900 years from today.
Yeah.
That's the Crusades and the Byzantine Empire. The Turkish Empire, Templar Order is still around.
Yeah.
So to be born during the end of the Crusades and then living up until today and having so little written about your life, there's just so much. Yeah, there's so much there that, you can assume by Yoda's fame that stuff must have happened. But what? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, in kind of in a lot of ways, if you think about the prequel trilogy, you're actually getting really close to the end of Yoda's life at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of anticlimactic for him. You know, he's actually almost on a downward trend as the Jedi Order is. You know, they're being murdered, but two, they're becoming less and less relevant, and the influence of the Jedi is waning on the galactic history, right?
Yeah.
And Yoda is sort of the captain of the ship as
it's sinking.
As it's sinking, yeah.
Yeah, his life very much mirrors the greater reality of the galaxy.
It's actually kind of tragic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he dies unknown, like a hermit on a planet with no other life. Well, other life, but no other sentient life, right?
Yeah.
This great hero and legend of Jedi mythology dies obscure and unknown. And I mean, Star Wars really is mostly a tragedy without the redemption arc at the end. So it's pretty fitting, but it is interesting that, a character of this much prominence, both in real life lore and in the Star Wars mythos, just has so little really known about him. I do think part of that is intentional. We did touch on this before on how Yoda and his species were always kind of like, one, obviously his mentor role, like he's supposed to be a legendary figure, and obviously legendary figures, you kind of lose that mythos if you dig too much into the reality of the person, right?
Yeah.
So when you meet him as this wise Jedi master, that's supposed to be the image you always have of him in your mind. You don't want to see him as like a young, impetuous youth or something like that, right?
Right.
It kind of ruins that mystique. And it seems he was like a wise Jedi master for most of his Jedi life, right? Even in his quote unquote younger years, right, at like 300 or 400 years old, he was already seen as being this like wise figure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think George Lucas did that on purpose. One, he was very protective of Yoda as a character, but also his species too. And like I said, we've mentioned this in a previous episode. The reason Yoda's species are unnamed and like a lot of his backstory is unknown is Lucas himself didn't want to name him or have any of his. Usually Lucas like farms out most of his IP to, even back when he owned it, he would farm it out to like different authors.
Right.
They'd send him their kind of story treatments, and then he'd kind of like approve or disapprove of broader concepts, right? Like, can we use Luke Skywalker? Can he do this? Can he do that? Or right. And he shot down anyone that tried to mess with Yoda's backstory or trying to name his species or pin any real kind of substantial information on him. Like I said, we do have that story of him very early on, and it's almost painted in this veneer of mythology of his early beginnings. I believe it comes from a comic book. It's just escaping me off the top of my head. But like other than that, which is fine, like it's a fine origin story. There's not a lot about his life and history. And again, I think that was done intentionally.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a very mythological type of character. Even the way he dies, he sort of like ascends to the heavens.
Exactly. He disappears. No one gets to kill him. No one.
It's not like he actually is killed by anything. You know,
he actually gets to go out peacefully on his terms.
Yeah, and it is strange. Did Yoda like choose to die? Did he choose to?
Yeah, could he have gone on if he chose to not die? Right.
Yeah, what was like training Luke his sort of like
life's
last
goal.
Contribution.
Exactly. And he's like, I'm done now. I have nothing else to contribute to the galaxy.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. It is very like mystical sage like type of writing, I suppose.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's again, Lucas didn't want to delve too much into his history for that reason, to maintain that. That also being said, that whole era, you see a lot of authors will try and jump into different eras of Star Wars history when they kind of want to have a clean distinction from the characters of the movies. So you've had people jump into the legacy era. You've had people go way back in the past in order to write stories that aren't really restricted by a lot of the known characters and things. But the era of for lack of a better word, the High Republic, or the era between like, the Sith, this end of the Sith Wars, the Sith kind of going dark, Darth Bane, and the Episode 1 era, there's not a whole lot written about that. Which presumably, yes, would have been a golden age of the Republic.
And Yoda would have been
at its head.
very involved in that era.
So, and like you could write characters 100 years before the beginning of episode 1, right? And all those characters, they wouldn't interfere too much with it. There are obvious restrictions. You can't have the Sith come back as any kind of major threat. But I do find that whole era interesting, that it was mostly dark for the longest time. And you may have already caught on to this where I'm going. But I do find it interesting that is an era that Disney has chosen to explore with their series called The High Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I despise Disney and their treatment of Star Wars, The High Republic, in principle, I do like a lot of the broad concepts of it. And I like that they're going into this era that is recognizable, but also distinct, right? You know, if you go way back in Star Wars history, things start to get a little unrecognizable. You don't know, you'll see a bunch of Sith and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Like, I don't recognize any of these characters. The Jedi Order look different. The spaceships look different. But the High Republic has so much in common with the era of the movies that it's still very recognizable as Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I like their general aesthetic. I like the 1920s kind of
me too.
vibe they got going on.
It almost, there was actually a lot of
Art Deco.
Yeah. No, there's actually a lot of like older Superman novels and stuff that the art reminds me of it. Like these sort of like very light golden colors and I don't know, like valorous depictions of characters
and heroism. And,
and there's a lot that reminds me of sort of the 60s 70s era of DC comics,
which, if I'm not mistaken, is called the golden age of comics.
No, the golden age is like the 40s.
Okay.
Yeah, the 60s and 70s is actually the silver age. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tried to make a comparison there, but I guess it didn't work.
Yeah, not quite.
But yeah, it's got very strong like Art Deco themes, and like to me, it's very reminiscent of the 1920s, like the Roaring 20s, right? Like, things are good, but it's right before some big bad stuff happens, right before World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So like you have this era where everyone thinks there's like peace and the galaxy's going, everything seems to be going well, and the High Republic has its own crises and stuff. Which again, I do like that they have threats other than the Sith, and they have other issues. I like the idea of a big disaster being a major starting point for it. There are elements I do like. As a whole, there's a lot I don't like. But this isn't to bash the High Republic or anything. We're just, this is the era we're talking about. And to give them credit, like that's kind of what it reminds me of, is this like peak High Republic before the descent into the era that we know, right? From the movies, you have a corrupt republic. The Jedi Order's place in the galaxy is kind of like iffy. A lot of times they're described as being arrogant. I don't know if they're ever actually described as corrupt themselves, but definitely arrogance is often painted onto the Jedi Order towards the end, and as being one of the reasons why they fall is that arrogance. And that kind of leads me to a question, like, do you think that's an accurate depiction of the High Council? Do you think that's a good depiction of Yoda maybe as a character? Was he maybe arrogant?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, he was sort of the captain of the ship as it was falling.
Right. Like and that's the thing, right? Is he to blame for...
Yeah. And you it's funny because when you're watching the movies or reading any of the literature, there's a narrative, right?
Yeah.
And so you're following the narrative, but you don't look at the story objectively. And if we were like outside observers watching the events unfold,
almost like a movie.
No,
as an audience.
No, but with no narrative input. Right. Like
if there's like a clinical history.
Yeah, you're just like you're say you're a historian reading, like trying to go
at
back
this
to all
date,
the source,
at this time, this happened. Yeah.
The source material. You might come to a very different conclusion about Yoda and who he was as a leader.
Yeah.
Right. Like now, maybe if you knew Yoda personally, you would have certain emotions towards him and a certain
defense.
Well, no, just like if you got to know him personally, you'd probably be very attached to him, and just the way he was and the way he mentored people and that kind of character. But, But if you were a historian, a disinterested historian, documenting everything, you might have a very different view of Yoda. And who he was and the decisions that he made, and almost that he was like, how could he have been so blinded to Darth Sidious, you know, and how, and even Plagius for that matter, like how did they, not
how did they
catch
get
his
so
radar?
close to be sitting in the same room and having
exactly.
conversations without knowing?
Yeah.
My counter argument to that is like pinning also historical events on individuals also isn't totally fair.
Yeah.
Yoda didn't make decisions in a vacuum. And
it's true. Yeah.
If anything, Yoda is the opposite of arrogant. So even though the Jedi Council might be painted as arrogant, and maybe they were, Yoda himself has been nothing but humble. And that's one of the things I was digging in his past. I was kind of looking, maybe there's a thread of arrogance where like he puts on this thing as a wise teacher and he's never wrong or something like that, right? But that's never the case. He seems to be just as interested in learning as he is to teach. And I mean, perhaps he was just sort of a victim of a system, right?
You know, that he could only do so much to change.
Well, I think one of the biggest points is he was one of the initial people to refuse to train Anakin Skywalker, and the council reversed their decision, but Yoda still maintained his position. Yeah. Even though the council, but he was willing to go along with what the council dictated. Right. And ultimately allow Obi-Wan to train Anakin, right? And
that was probably like a political thing too.
Right, exactly. There's internal politics and things like that.
Like he can't, like there's only so much he can veto the will of the council, right?
But it also gets complicated when you think of things like, okay, if Anakin was a chosen one, maybe all this had to happen, right? Yeah. So did Anakin have to fall to the dark side and betray, right? It just leads to these big questions that like we can't really answer concretely and say like, was Yoda wrong for denying Anakin, or was Yoda right for denying Anakin? Obviously, because Anakin was the linchpin that destroyed the Jedi Order, right? Yeah. And it's hard to say. But for one, I think we can at least say that Yoda wasn't arrogant, at least as an individual. Interestingly, I don't want to turn this whole thing into a compare and contrast thing, but Yoda does appear in the High Republic as already head of the Order. Right. And they try to pin Yoda as the reason the Jedi Council.
How far before Battle of Yavin is High Republic again?
I don't know exactly in number of years. I think it's in the scale of hundreds of years before.
Yeah. But it can't have been, because I thought it was like 800 years before, but then Yoda's
already Grandmaster.
Yeah. So maybe it's like 400 or 500.
Yeah, and I want to say Yoda's 500 years. Anyone can correct me if they're wrong. I haven't really been highly invested in it.
Sure, yeah.
But just from the stuff that I've gathered, I believe he's around 500 already. So he's like an established Grandmaster. He's an established master. And according to the High Republic, he's the one that imposes the rule of not having attachments. It's how they try to describe it is that all Jedi have different ways of connecting with the Force. But Yoda is the one that imposes his own way of connecting with the Force, which is this like unattached kind of mystical approach. And then because he forces it on everyone else, right? And that's why. And then you trace that down to Anakin, like being forced not to have attachments, which ultimately causes him to fall to the dark side.
Yeah, which is another argument.
And it's a big way of blaming Yoda.
If they gave him more leeway, would he not have turned to the dark side?
Right.
Who's to say?
And the other thing, like how much responsibility does Anakin have in all this, right?
Exactly.
Like he definitely is a flawed character, right? So just because, the Jedi Order has rules, you can't just blame them specifically for their own downfall either. Yeah. And the whole attachment thing, right? Like it's interesting. I wonder where Lucas because Lucas being a Buddhist, obviously tried to put a lot of Buddhism into Star Wars. Yeah. So like on the one hand, is he criticizing Buddhism? Because obviously the Buddhist philosophy is to remove your attachment. So that would be, from the perspective of Lucas, theoretically a good thing, right? So then in the new Jedi Order, they kind of reverse course on that. We're like, you should love everyone with an open hand, I guess is the best way of describing Luke's kind of philosophy on attachment. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say, like, is this clinical disassociation? Yeah, it's emotionally stunting, I guess you could say, from Western thought. But if you're a Buddhist monk, that's exactly what you're trying to attain, right? Yeah. So like a Western social psychologist might say, you're emotionally stunted. Yeah. Or a Buddhist might say you're enlightened, right? So it's hard to.
Well, and we get a little bit of some insight into Yoda's philosophy from the words that he says. And in The Phantom Menace, he said, there's that famous quote where fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering, right? And he, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was talking about Anakin and his mother. Yeah. In that context, that like his attachment, and Anakin would be afraid of what would happen to his mother, right? Yeah. And so, the fear, that's his thought processes, right? But yeah, you kind of hear his own philosophy come out in the lines that are written for him.
And again, like, I don't think that's Yoda's personal philosophy. Yoda's just an orthodox Jedi. That's what all Jedi should believe, right? So again, making Yoda linchpin for the fall of the Jedi Order, I don't think is fair. No, either in canon or in Legends. Yeah. Well, I guess in canon they can do what they want, but I don't. But yeah, in Legends at least, I could say that Yoda is not solely responsible, even though he's a captain of a sinking ship. He did not crash the ship, right? The ship was already on a collision course. He just happened to be at the helm.
And, he's not a straight old white man. He's a green man.
He's green.
so how could you possibly blame him?
It's not his fault.
For everything.
Yeah. On that note too, the dark side, and Yoda constantly bring this up, it clouds things. Yoda's trying to, discern the future to determine the greatest course of action, but it's always been clouded by the dark side. So it's not, again, he's not making decisions in a vacuum. There's an active opposing force acting on him as well. Yeah. So it's like, can I blame you for not being able to see the future? Is that your fault? Right. And even as someone who's not force sensitive, Jordan, is that your fault that you can't see the future? Right. If the economy tanks tomorrow, is that your fault? Right.
Yes.
So how much blame can one little green man shoulder?
That's true.
For all these things. One thing I will hold him and the rest of the Jedi Council to account for, though, is the Grand Army of the Republic. Should they have known better than using essentially a slave? This comes up a lot. I bring this up a lot because it's still a thing that's in the back of my mind that no one wants to deal with. Using essentially slave children soldiers, and Yoda leading them personally into combat with like no reservations.
It's one of those things where you could, and I know I'm maybe inserting, really reading between the lines here, but okay, you know how, and you and I have actually talked about this, but you know how like a lot of people will read history and read just completely alien and foreign cultures to modern Western society, and they'll sort of like compare their morality to our morality,
right? Yeah.
And there's this mistake that people make, like, slavery is one of those things, or even child soldiers is another thing. These are very modern
ideas,
ethics, right? Yeah. Like, and there wasn't even a grid for that in those eras.
Yeah.
And so
and even like things like, okay, is a 13-year-old a child soldier? Is he already a man by the standards of a medieval society, right? Like,
precisely. And even other things, like, compared to what up to that point, civilization and society was far more brutal than it is now. And a lot of the reasons that we enjoy these sort of like Enlightenment values and
is because we created
because we created such a prosperous society that we can actually afford to do that. Back then you can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
In those times.
Yeah, the guy who has an army of child soldiers is just going to overrun you because they're not questioning whether or not they are doing the moral choice.
Right. So I think there's a lot of judgment from like us modern people on like ancient society, and even on like, let's say, a fictional society. We're talking about like a completely alien culture.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Like, how can we impose our values upon them and say like, well, this is certainly wrong. Yes, it's wrong to me.
I'm not even I like clone troopers. I love the Grand Army of the Republic.
Yeah.
My problem doesn't stem for whether it's not strictly right or wrong,
Yeah.
but that it's inconsistent with Jedi teaching. That's where I kind of
within their own
within their own moral framework, there's a
yeah.
problem, right? I personally have no problem with cloning humans and sending them to war, but within the moral framework of the Jedi, it would make more sense for them to be leading battle droids and then the CIS to be using child soldiers, right? And you could make that a whole theme, right?
Yeah.
Now, I do like the inverse, where like the Jedi maybe reach such a point that they're involved with politics that they have to get their hands dirty, and they're like, this is the will of the Republic, we serve the Republic, if they're doing the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing too, right? But that's never brought up. That's never even brought up as a conversation. And something that's even really clear in that is that Ahsoka, when she has a hard time killing clone troopers, and they go through great lengths in the Clone Wars to establish this relationship between clones and Jedi. Clones are real people, they have feelings, they matter, they're not just robots. And Ahsoka doesn't want to even kill the clones who are trying to kill her after Order 66. She goes out of her way to preserve clone lives, and it's tragic when she kills them. And then on screen you have like Obi-Wan and Yoda just killing clones like nobody's business, like not even batting an eye. Now, maybe Yoda's just so detached at that point from the situation that like he's like, they're trying to kill me, I'm just going to kill them because I have to do what I have to do to survive. That's possible. I will accept that. But the fact that it's never broached, it's never approached, it's never talked about, it's never really discussed. There's elements of it that were brought up in the Clone Wars comic book series, the Republic. You had a faction of Splinter Jedi, but that was more a question they didn't want to fight a war. That was more a political question, more so than they cared about clone lives. And again, I keep beating this dead horse because I want answers. I just want someone to explain or at least show.
Clones' lives matter?
I say clones' lives matter. Yeah, CLM. But yeah, exactly. I do want to. I want to see someone bring up that discussion, right, and maybe have an internal dialogue where you see kind of Yoda's perspective on like why he justifies it. Even it could be it can be justified, but again, we don't see it. So how I'm reading into Star Wars now, my own narrative, right? So
true.
Yeah, that's all. It's just that internal inconsistency that bothers me. But yeah. Anyways, moving on. Another interesting compare and contrast with Disney canon. Yoda is very reminiscent of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
And obviously that's what Rian Johnson was going for. And as critical, and I despise the movie The Last Jedi, don't get me wrong. That's what Rian Johnson appears to be going for, was to make Luke go through the same character
a jaded
arc.
old hermit.
Yeah. And not so much that Yoda was jaded, but he was jaded.
He was.
He didn't believe.
I think he was.
He didn't believe that Darth Vader could be redeemed, and that was the whole problem between him and Luke Skywalker. Luke is this, optimistic young kid who thinks he can save his dad, and Yoda's like, I've lived 900 years. Well, I've seen all of this.
Yoda even, if I remember correctly, Yoda even told Luke that he wasn't going to train him because he's too old.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
it's not like, oh, look, Luke's here to save the day, and I'm, it's my, purpose to save him. No.
He was like already kind of cynical as soon as he met
Luke showed up. Yeah. So, cynical, I guess, is a better word for Yoda. And Yoda kind of had to learn from Luke that redemption was possible, and that was kind of Luke's whole arc, is Luke kind of teaching Yoda, the student becomes the master, right?
Right.
Like, Luke now is like, no, I'm so optimistic, I'll bet my life that I can save my dad, and he ends up being right.
Yeah.
Right, and proves Yoda wrong. And I like that they actually had a story of Yoda and Count Dooku being one of Yoda's former students.
Right. Yeah.
And Dooku burns Yoda. Right?
Yeah.
And badly. And Dooku even tries to leverage that. Dooku's like, hey, I'll defect, right? And tricks Yoda into a trap. And that's when Yoda's really like, nah.
Yeah.
Once you're in the dark side, you can't come back.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I said, it's interesting because, that is Luke's character arc in The Last Jedi. Now, that being said, I think it's dumb because Luke was the one that is already gone through this development. He's the hopeful guy who taught Yoda.
But there's also, Rian Johnson doesn't give Luke's character a reason to be that jaded.
Right, exactly.
At least Yoda had a reason.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's
like
well explained.
Yeah.
But with Luke, it's like, oh, you had a bad dream. The guy who risked his life to save his dad would kill his nephew over a bad dream, and then becomes a jaded old man, even though he's seen firsthand the redemptive power of the light side.
The motivations are
so
weird.
it spits in the face of everything that came before it.
Right.
But that's because it's it's so narrow and shallow, but it's meant to be deep. And that's what irks me, right? Is that people are like, oh, you just don't get that he's supposed to be the Yoda of the new generation. I'm like, no, you don't get what Yoda was. Right?
Yeah.
You think and that's what makes it so much worse, is you think you know, but you really don't know. You really don't get it. And, but it is interesting just to see that comparison.
Yoda is a better Yoda than Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say.
And then Yoda comes in as a Force ghost, and then
that was a weird scene too.
Yeah. No, it was, but that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
I'm now a cynical. Maybe I should just stay here on Dagobah. And
I don't think we should ever leave.
I see what Yoda was going for. Maybe I got too close. I touched.
Disney has burned us too many times.
Too many times. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note,
I'm just gonna go wander the swamps.
All right. See you later, dude. Peace.